6 a.m. Day is breaking over the lagoon. Venice lies between sea and sky. Slowly, the sunlight warms the walls. The town sleepily stretches her limbs. Little by little, Venice awakes. Life resumes in this town like no other. Venice is not easily accessible. You have to take her slowly, follow her byways and the approach imposed by the sea. And yet in the early morning, the proud maritime city reveals herself without her makeup. It is a rare, brief moment. It's rush hour for the delivery men. They have to have finished resupplying the town before their routes have become too busy. And rubbish removal has to have been completed. Then the sun may rise on Venice and the show can begin. Venice became established over more than 100 islands, the better to defend itself. Between the islands, the main channel of communication winds along the curves of an S, the Grand Canal. Along its sides, it is joined by many other canals, both small and large. The buildings of Venice are precariously balanced. They stand on a veritable forest of wooden piles buried in a clay soil saturated with salt water. For centuries, the town has fought against erosion and attempted to consolidate its foundations. In the early days, there were almost no bridges in Venice. There were just a few wooden footbridges. Today, the town has more than 400 bridges made of different materials and with very different shapes. Whether they're made of metal, concrete, or even wood, the bridges guarantee the unity of the town. In Venice, there is nothing more common than a bridge. However, some of them are far from ordinary. A few are private. Others have kept the original form of the Venetian bridge, with no parapet. The history of Venice is written in stone. The founders of the town were fleeing the continent and its barbarian invasions. It soon became a link between the East and the West. By combining skills and intelligence, Venice rose to head a powerful empire. Everything bears witness to the formidable ambitions of the town, which first caught up and then overtook Byzantium. By assimilating the different cultures of its neighbors and its rivals, it gradually created its own style with its personal lines and designs. The inverted cone chimneys prevented burning ash from falling on the wooden roofs. Venice is not simply a prestigious setting in which to take a break. It is a real town designed for its inhabitants, whose numbers are ever decreasing. In the 15th century, about 200,000 people lived here. Today, there are about 1/3 that number. The others have been discouraged by the exorbitant cost of living. Native Venetians are also decreasing in number. Enrico Ricciardi is one of them.
There are not many of those Venetians nowadays. I think there are about 10 or 11,000 who are Venetians born and bred and still living in Venice. It's a wonderful town, but not easy to live in. It's complicated, especially as regards means of transport. In fact, the whole town is devoted to tourism.
Over 20 million tourists come to Venice every year. Like Venetians, they have to cope, but only for a very short time, with one of the town's main difficulties: transport.
If you think about it, when you have to carry a parcel or a suitcase from your home to the station, for example, in any other town you have a car waiting for you in the street, ready to go.
In Venice, with or without luggage, you have to take a boat. On the lagoon, an expressway is marked out in the middle of the shallows to take you to the airport. You also have to get a boat to go and get your car from the car park or to get to the station. It takes experience and a lot of skill to pilot a boat in Venice. There are large numbers of boats using the canals, and their dimensions are not always adapted to the traffic. The result is that there are frequent snarl-ups that require delicate maneuvering. Owning your own boat in Venice is a luxury. The main difficulty is finding a place to berth. There are very few Venetians who, like Enrico, own a garage. So you have to fall back on the kayak or public transport. The vaporetto is a sort of bus and is usually packed. But there are other ways of getting round on the canals. The water taxi is particularly reserved for wealthy tourists, and every activity uses its own type of boat. There are boats for the fire service, ambulances, undertakers, and the post office. There's the Black Maria. And the police have speedboats and jet skis so they can catch reckless drivers. Speed is strictly limited, and the police have speed traps to keep an eye on it. Giordano Zuin.
At the moment, we're measuring the speed of the boats on the Grand Canal, where the limits currently in force are very strict. 7 kilometers an hour, 11 kilometers an hour for public transport vehicles.
Despite the policeman's fears, there are infringements and therefore fines. The culprit always has an explanation, but the police also have their arguments.
The main traffic problems in Venice are obviously due to the number of boats moving around, and also the speed, because boats moving through water cause waves, and the waves cause instability. This is dangerous, particularly for smaller vessels like rowing boats and gondolas.
Some waves could cause the traghetto to capsize. The traghetto is a boat that takes standing passengers across the Grand Canal. The famous gondola is always associated with the image of Venice itself. Records show that gondolas were used here as far back as the end of the 11th century. The flat-bottomed asymmetrical hull allows it to be propelled with a single oar. Standing at the stern, the gondolier moves the oar in 3 movements. Gondoliers sometimes utter strange sounds.
Ahoy is in a way the gondolier's hooter. Motorboats are like cars. They go beep, beep, beep. The gondola goes ahoy to announce its arrival, and it has priority over motorboats.
Igor Vignotto is one of the 425 qualified Venetian gondoliers. They have many different skills.
Tourists often ask us to sing. That's not a problem for me, but 90% of gondoliers don't want to sing. So, if I sing, the other gondoliers tell me to shut up. Otherwise, their passengers will ask them to sing too.
Gondolas used to be sumptuously decorated and painted in bright colors. But things have changed.
The gondolas are black. The color has been the same for all gondolas since a 1630 law of the Republic of Venice. However, on the inside, everyone can decorate as he likes. We can put lions, seahorses, angels. On mine, for example, in this part that we call Cimiero, I've written my granddaughter's name, Aurora.
The gondolier's uniform is as well known as the gondola, and yet it has no historical origin. Gianpolo Desti.
We used to wear a jacket called La Marinaia. the navy. A real sailor's jacket that we changed with the seasons. It was white in spring and summer, black in autumn and in winter. Then, with the increasing importance of tourism, this uniform came into being and is now known throughout the world.
Why don't you always wear your hat?
It's windy today, so the hat gets blown off.
The gondolier has to have a perfect knowledge of the town. He can also serve as a guide.
That terrace on the roof is called altana. It's peculiar to the 1700s. In those days, women lightened their hair to the color Venetian blonde by exposing it to the sun. And they did that on those terraces, the altane. A gondola lasts on average between 20 and 30 years. It depends on how well the gondolier looks after it. There are still 5 gondola building workshops known as squari. This is an old squero, one of the rare few that still exist. It's where the gondolas are built and small boats repaired.
A gondola is made up of 280 pieces of wood. A few enthusiasts collect the souvenirs of a genuine heritage, Germano da Preda.
They're mainly working boats. When they can't be used anymore, the old boats are destroyed because, unfortunately, in Venice, there's no room to keep them.
The traditional gondolas are part of the scenery in Venice, but some, dating back a long way, are true works of art, like the hearse gondola. There also used to be the gondolas equipped with the felze, a sort of cabin that was quite useful.
Here at the front, there's the door equipped with an opening that you could close with a screen or open with a glass pane. That means that inside, the owner had a comfortable and totally private space. That was very useful for romantic assignations, but also for business meetings.
The gondolier's oar pivots on the rowlock, a sort of fork carved from a single piece of walnut or cherry wood.
What you see here are traditional rowlocks, old rowlocks that were really used.
The rowlock is adapted to the height and bulk of the gondolier. Without this accessory, it is impossible to move or steer the gondola. A few rare craftsmen, the remeri, still make oars and rowlocks in the traditional way. Severio Pastor.
When the Venetians came to the islands, the first inhabitants needed boats and oars. Somebody started to make oars as well as these objects, more and more sophisticated rowlocks. To start with, they were flat. Now they're more complex. They changed during the last century. Each curve has its own function. Here for getting underway, here for moving slowly along, with one oarsman or several oarsmen to come alongside on the right or on the left, or go astern.
Traditions sometimes undergo adaptations. The first Rialto bridge was made up of boats moored to each other side by side. The Rialto was built at the end of the 16th century and for a long time was the only bridge to cross the Grand Canal. It was high enough to allow large vessels to pass underneath. It replaced a wooden bridge where merchants had been used to meeting from the Middle Ages. Instead of depriving the merchants of their business, the town decided to incorporate shops into the new construction. A question of hard cash, as the city didn't want to pay compensation to the shopkeepers who'd lost out. The district was quickly inhabited because the canal bank was considerably higher than the water level, whence the name Rialto, High Bank. Around the Rialto, a number of traditional crafts bear witness to the very ancient prosperity of the district. The mallet strikes a leather pad placed on the marble. These are the working tools of the gold beater, who reduces the metal to extremely fine gold leaf. The gold leaves are then formatted and handled with wooden instruments so that they don't stick to the fingers. This is work of infinite delicacy on a material almost as light as air. The gold leaf is used by, among others, bookbinders, ceramists, cabinet makers, picture framers, and jewelers. Another craft tradition is at the origin of the ghetto. Since the 16th century, this has been the district of Venice where the Jews have settled. The word ghetto means foundry in Venetian, and the term has been adopted everywhere. Buildings had to be high because the area allotted to their quarter was very limited. Because of the lack of space, the Jewish community of Venice has never been able to develop. In some quarters, Venetians indulge in one of their passions, second-hand goods. It must be said that in craftwork and as far as most of the decorative arts are concerned, the city is not short of resources. A passing customer or a regular client, a wily expert or occasional amateur, everyone gets a kick out of it. Enrico has his stall there.
I sell books mainly. I have a lot on Venice, old books. But I also have other sorts of books, and I have some in English and French. These are stencils. The artist is Brunelleschi, a great painter from the 30s to the 50s. They're taken from a book by Casanova. Their inspiration is very erotic, in the Italian style, and a little French too. They're very attractive without being vulgar.
In its very special setting, supplying Venice has always been a question of strategy. This is why the Rialto market has such an importance. Several markets come together there. In the Herbaria market, you find all sorts of fruit and vegetables, but all are imported. Even produce that can be easily got in Italy. That obviously has an effect on prices, particularly on artichoke hearts. On the site of a former palace that was pulled down because its owners had plotted against the town, the fish market, the pescaria, has been set up. The shrimps from the lagoon are eaten floured and fried in oil. In winter particularly, people eat schies, shrimps that are grey when they're cooked, mixed with tiny octopus and squid. In Venice, the sea feeds, the sea protects. The sea transports, but it also causes a few problems. The salt gives rise to corrosion that is worsened by chemical pollution. What's more, the water level varies considerably, a phenomenon that disrupts daily life and the work of the gondoliers.
Every 6 hours in Venice, the tide level rises and falls. Every 5 hours and 40 minutes to be precise. And then, it also depends on the moon. When it's full, the tide is much higher. So the gondolier also has to know the tides, because when the water is high, it's difficult to pass under the bridges.
In winter, the water can rise to a meter above the average. The acqua alta, the high water, signifies an exceptionally high tide that floods and paralyzes a large part of the town. To counter the intrusive incursions of the sea, the Venetians have launched a gigantic project called Mose, Moses in Italian. Flavia Faccioli, an architect, has done a great deal of work on it.
Il progetto Mose è un dispositivo The Moses Project is a mechanism built where the lagoon and the sea come together. It's made up of 78 mobile dikes, all independent from each other, that rise and form a barrier to the tide. But as soon as the threat posed by the tide disappears, the dikes no longer interfere at all with the environment, nor with the economic activities, nor with the exchange of water between the sea and the lagoon, which is the most important thing.
Despite the fact that the sea has been threatening it for centuries, the famous St. Mark's Square is still there at the lowest part of the town. The square is dominated by a bell tower, which was used as a watchtower. St. Mark's Square is unendingly invaded by visitors and by pigeons, which one is not allowed to feed, in theory. The square was a salon splendide for Napoleon, who occupied Venice at the end of the 18th century. At that time, the Café Florian, a masterpiece of elegance, already existed. The clock tower has been standing at one end of the square since the end of the 15th century. It gives information on the phases of the moon, which tells sailors about the tides. It is also the first digital clock in history, since it gives the time in figures. The mechanism of the astronomical clock is very complicated. The clock has undergone many restorations through history, and in the middle of the 19th century, all the clocks in Venice were set to it. At the top of the tower, two statues strike a bell. They're considered to be Moors because of the very dark color of their bronze. Nearby, there's a crowd in front of St. Mark's Basilica. The layout and adornments of the building are reminiscent of a Byzantine church. Byzantium and Venice were in fact very close before falling out forever. The Venetians stole a number of works of art from the Byzantines. Among them were, for example, very ancient statues in red porphyry, a very hard stone. The Doge's palace was the residence of the Venetian head of state, the Doge. The building was the nerve center of the city, but was also the symbol of its power. The Doge was enthroned at the top of a colossal staircase. Inside the palace, the decoration is incredibly lavish, even in places where visitors are merely passing through. The four-door room is only a waiting room, but no expense was spared in making it beautiful. The ceilings are divided into panels, and some of the frescoes were created by Tintoretto, one of the most famous Venetian painters of the Renaissance. Veronese, another giant of Venetian painting, also contributed to the work. From the ceilings to the floors in marble mosaic, everything pays homage to a powerful town that was called Serenissima for its unshakable serenity. The 500 people who made up the People's Assembly gathered in the Great Council Chamber. This was not really a democratic meeting because attendance was reserved for people of note. The chamber, which is over 50 meters long, is superbly decorated. The Triumph of Venice is a painting by Veronese that represents the naval battle at Lepanto, where the Ottomans suffered a crushing defeat. Venice's overwhelming military might is evoked in its arms factory. For waging distant wars or launching assaults nearer to home, it contains an impressive collection of 15th and 16th century weapons. One curiosity is the war armor of the French King Henry IV, presented to Venice by the monarch himself. In contrast to its opulence, the basement of the Doge's palace contains a damp and unhealthy prison. When night falls, Napoleon's Salon Splendide is turned into a ballroom. Viennese waltzes are quite normal since Venice was once Austrian. In February and March, strange characters appear and mingle with the crowds of visitors. It's carnival time. For a short period, people's roles are recast, and it is hard to tell what is real from what is false. Venice becomes one huge stage. In the past, in the very aristocratic town, the carnival gave the populace the illusion that they could mix with high society. And the reverse was also true. Nobles had the chance to rub shoulders with the population. To avoid any provocation, it was recommended that wealthy Venetians should not wear their jewels. Today, the festivities last for about 10 days. They used to spread over about half the year. The carnival found its second wind in Venice in the 1980s, after it was suppressed by Napoleon at the end of the 18th century. In Venice, the mask was the best way to ignore social barriers. It ensured that people could have fun and express themselves freely without worrying about the consequences. You could wear any costume, as long as you lived up to your part. Ridiculing the clothes of any important personage was quite out of the question. Stefano Nicolaou is reputed for the quality of the costumes he makes.
For individual clients, for example when the carnival is on, I also act as an advisor to see, according to the personality of the client, which costume suits them best.
There are many sources of inspiration for the costumes.
There are two categories. On the one hand, costumes that come from the imagination, corresponding to the image people have of Venice. And on the other, there are those more traditional, historical costumes linked to the ancient tradition of the Venice Carnival. For example, the bauta, the costumes of the Commedia dell'arte.
The carnival costumes disguise social categories, but they reveal a flourishing activity, a surprising sense of detail.
Here we're in the delivery ward workshop, as you might say, where we create the costumes. A small selection of costumes like this one can be rented. You can also hire all the accessories. For example, this lady's hat. There are also Casanova costumes, gondoliers, soldiers. This is a Doge's hat, inspired by the one in the Correr Museum. It's encrusted with jewels. It's reminiscent of hats from Turkey or India.
Turchi e dell'India.
There are costumes for everyone, and music for all tastes. Venice can resound to the sounds of the tropics. Venice can just as easily dance to the rustic rhythm of a band from Bergamo. Throughout its history, Venice has always known how to welcome and hold on to artists. In all areas of artistic creation, the town has provided an exceptional setting. For opera, the Fenice Theatre is second to none. The Fenice was created at the end of the 18th century, and the music of Verdi or Rossini still resounds there. The building has been ravaged by fire 3 times, but each time it has been magnificently restored. In fact, that is where its name originates. Fenice means phoenix, the legendary bird that is reborn from its own ashes.
The construction of this theatre is owed to the fact that the noble families of the time all wanted to be in at the birth of the greatest theatre in Venice. There was strong competition, and with this project, they in fact created the biggest stage in Venice.
In Venice, not all the performances take place in grand auditoriums. They can be held in the intimate spaces of small rooms in some of the palaces. In Venice, there are references to artistic creation everywhere, and especially in the architecture. The noble parts of buildings are always on the upper floors. It was here at the beginning of the 18th century that the famous playwright Carlo Goldoni was born. Goldoni is considered to be the founder of modern Italian comedy. From his early childhood, he was attracted by the theatre. He played with puppets that in those days were called wooden actors. Venice is a huge source of inspiration for artists. The International Exhibition of Contemporary Art has become a major event. It exploits marvelously the contrast between the boldness of the works of art and the ancient buildings. The Grassi Palace is a jewel of 18th century Venetian architecture. The sculpted and gilded coffer ceilings have not been disfigured by the technical fittings. The works were financed by the French businessman François Pinault, and it is where he exhibits part of his collections. The maritime customs at the entrance to the Grand Canal was where customs clearance took place for goods entering the town. The huge warehouses have been restored in order to make use of their space. The buildings have been converted by the same patron as financed the Grassi Palace and by the same architect, Taddeo Ando. The idea of contemporary art refers to all creations after the Second World War. Contemporary art overturns many aesthetic conventions. Thus, the materials used are unusual and the proportions are disconcerting, which does not preclude love at first sight. Still alongside the Grand Canal, in a protected and peaceful place, lies rich American heiress Peggy Guggenheim. Beside her, the grave of 14 little dogs, her pets. She lived here for the last 30 years of an exceptional life devoted to her legendary collection. It is said that during that time she bought a work of art every day. And not any old work of art. Peggy Guggenheim was in fact for a long time the main patron of a great abstract painter, the American Jackson Pollock, thereafter one of the most sought after. The Biennale of Venice is first and foremost a foundation. Every 2 years it organizes artistic events bringing together the most prominent artists of the time. In the Giardini, the gardens, numerous pavilions receive artists from different countries. The Venice Biennale spreads throughout the town, and particularly to the arsenal, a weapons and ammunition depot, but above all, workshops of the shipyard founded in the 12th century. The arsenal is still today partly a military area. However, since the end of the 1990s, the Italian Navy has allowed certain buildings to be used for the architectural biennale. The Architectural Biennale is organized in alternate years to the exhibition of contemporary art. The event has become one of the great gatherings of the world's architects. All the military might of Venice depended on the arsenal. Its organization and its production were remarkable, to such an extent that a vessel left the shipyard every day. A museum contains some astonishing models, like the one of the Bucentaur, a ceremonial galley where celebrations of the marriage of Venice to the sea were held. Napoleon had the luxurious ship burnt in order to recuperate the gold that covered it. The town, christened La Serenissima, was also called La Dominante because of its power over the sea. Of course, there are always many boats around the arsenal. But today, some of them are particularly noticeable because of their elegance and decoration. A large-scale event is being prepared. There is a bustle on all the canals across town. The crowd is gathering to jostle for the best seats at a great annual event. The Regatta Storica, the historic regatta, has existed since the end of the 15th century. It's one of the most popular events in Venice. The Doge is in the best seat. The former first person of Venice presides over a procession which shows the importance of the oar in the Venetian navy. Today, the town relives its brilliant past. Many boats plough up and down the Grand Canal, and traffic must not be hindered in any way. The police are keeping watch. The high spot of the show, the race between gondoliers with two to a crew. The origins of this competition are lost in history. Some think it commemorates the exploit of young Venetians setting off to search for their girlfriends who had been abducted by pirates. Others believe that it refers to the fishermen and gondoliers who compete to get to the best places first. The Venice Lagoon was formed by the alluvium deposited by the rivers that flow into its shallow waters. Only 10% of the lagoon is navigable. The rest is covered with islands and marshes. The islands have allowed Venice to delocalize certain activities. In the 19th century, after being a prison, San Michele became an island cemetery. Prior to that, the dead were buried in the town around the churches. The island of Murano is one of the largest. It has a lighthouse and many boats are stored and maintained there. Once upon a time, Murano was covered with vines, orchards, and pleasure gardens. The name of Murano is known all over the world, thanks to its production of glass. As Venice feared fires above all else, the town decided to transfer this industry to Murano at the end of the 13th century. Since then, the techniques of the glass blowers have remained unchanged, and the secrets of manufacture jealously guarded. With one twist, the craftsman folds gold leaf into the ball of molten glass. Further on, the island of Burano can be recognized by its brightly painted houses and its leaning bell tower. The colors helped fishermen to spot their houses from far off. Today, house owners have to respect the colors chosen by the town council, and anyone taking liberties is liable to a fine. Burano owes its reputation to its colors, but also to a tradition which dates back to the 16th century, handmade needle lace. This is a technique that brought international repute to the island. Even at the court of Louis XIV, Burano lace was known and appreciated. The designs are so complex that their finesse is often compared to that of a spider's web. At the beginning of the 20th century, when the technique was being forgotten, young women were called in to perpetuate the craft. The Burano lace makers use a sewing needle instead of the traditional bobbin. Today, the succession is no longer guaranteed. Giulia Palmisano.
No, there are only elderly people. It takes a long time to make a doily. There are no young people anymore. Girls don't want to learn how to make lace. It's going to disappear, unfortunately.
With their special touch, the lace makers make a whole series of objects.
Doilies, collars, flowers, and other beautiful things that are used to decorate the home.
The Lido Island stretches over a dozen kilometers between the lagoon and the sea. The long bar protects Venice, though not completely. The Lido Island is very residential. The passage of time seems to have left it unscathed. At the end of August and the beginning of September, the Lido bubbles with excitement. Visitors flock in from around the world for the Mostra, the oldest cinema festival in the world. It was first held in 1932. It was only after the success of this event that the Cannes Film Festival was created to rival it. The awarding of the first prize, the Golden Lion, is the high point of the Mostra. It is a world-class event worthy of the Italian cinema industry and of the artists who've been honored and recompensed here. Without the Mostra, the Lido Island would be limited to the pleasures of the beach. But thanks to the cinema festival, the Lion of St. Mark has widened its aura even more. Passing triumphs succeed one another under the artificial light. But throughout its turbulent history, Venice has shone with an eternal splendor. Water and earth have come together to create a tangible reality from an unimaginable town. Refinement and pleasure, culture and power have endowed it with a soul. Venice and its islands harbor treasures without number. It is a true island treasure.